Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. I'm Dan Bova from entrepreneur.com, and we have got another informative and invigorating episode of Ask Marc. This is the show, as you all know, where Marc Randolph, the co founder and founding CEO of Netflix, is here to answer your questions. He has mentored hundreds of early stage businesses. He hosts the That Will Never Work podcast. And most importantly, he's here today. I see questions already rolling in. That's awesome. Pop them in the chat. We've got a bunch on social media already. So we're ready to go. Marc, are you ready to go?
Well, Dan, thank you for having me here. I'm certainly going to do my best to be informative. As for the energetic part, we'll have to see how that goes.
Okay. All right. Well, Marc, again, thanks to everyone. And I already see you putting in questions. That's great. Marc, I have one burning question. Um, This weekend was the premiere of the new season of Succession. Are all rich and powerful people that miserable?
Yeah, well, I will confess that I too was sitting there in front of the TV at 8:01 p.m. on Sunday to catch up with America, with the world's most dysfunctional family. Um, but it is interesting. I know it's a toss-out question, but I am a toss-up question, but it's funny because I grew up in a reasonably affluent town, and I often say that the huge advantage that gave me, besides any of the ones about I got to go to a good school and didn't worry about where my next meal was coming from, which I recognize how lucky I am for that. But the real benefit of growing up in a wealthy town is you got to see just how unhappy some of these extremely rich, powerful people were. And it wasn't conscious, but I often look back and go, what it did was help me break that connection that the media hammers into you, that if you're only rich, you'll be happy. And
Right.
I was so lucky that that never was something that I grew up with. And as a result, I've kind of not all the startups I've done, none of them were ever about trying to make a lot of money. And, someone always has more, be happy with where you are. That's the real message here.
Oh, that's awesome. See, you ask a silly question and you get a smart answer from this guy. It's remarkable. It's crazy. Well, let's jump right into it because everyone's firing away in the chat, which is awesome. Um, Well, this kind of dovetails into what you were just talking about. This one came in through your website, I believe. And someone wants to know what is one thing that you could say that has really helped you to get to the place that you're at? What is a part of either your personality or your drive that you feel was kind of critical to you finding success?
Yeah. First of all, I will toss off the fact that I'm glad you pulled one of the questions that came in on the website. Because, of course, if you have questions you want to ask in future Ask Marcs, you can shoot them into Entrepreneur. But the ones that end up on my website, which does have a spot you can ask questions, sometimes end up here too. So keep that in mind, everybody. But the answer to the question, you look back at these things and you try and piece together what are the things that of who I am that actually help. What are the ones that hurt? And quite frankly, sometimes it's really hard to tell the difference. It's really hard sometimes to know, am I successful in spite of how I am or because of who I am? So there's a lot of gray area there, I'll tell you the truth. But I think one of the big things is I'm incredibly curious. I go down rabbit holes all the time. So I'm that guy who at dinner, when someone asks some weird question, I'm the guy who has to be rude and pull out his phone and Google it because I'm really curious what the answer is. And almost all the startups that I've done have started there because I was curious about something. And we talked in that bad question you asked earlier, Dan, about are all rich families dysfunctional? And it led down this thing about that I wasn't motivated by money. I was really motivated by curiosity. And it's an incredibly powerful motivational force because curiosity doesn't go away. It's really what makes you wake up in the morning and want to come to work because you're curious about what are the results of the tests we ran. You're curious about, were we able to pull this thing off? What is this new design going to look like? Oh, wow. What can we really do to make this happen? And so I would have to say it is that I'm a curious person, and I have to say that's probably one of the single most important factors that have given me whatever success I've had.
That's great. That's great. And I've witnessed post entrepreneur elevator pitch. Someone asked a goofy question and you took the phone out. You had to find the answer. So I've seen it with my own eyes.
Uh,
So we've got a question from someone sent in named Matt Meter. He asked, "I've just started my own business 4 weeks ago. How do I juggle servicing existing clients versus developing new business?"
so the question was, there it is. This is 4 weeks ago. Well, the first thing I always say is don't quit your day job. Um, you do not want to go all in on an idea. And some of the question, I can't tell whether this thing you started 4 weeks ago is something that you've been doing on the side for 4 years, or whether it's an idea you had 5 weeks ago. And if it's the latter is what I'm concerned about. Um, what you really want to do is you got to make sure you keep your day job going. That's the thing that pays the rent. That's the thing that pays your car payments and your house payments or whatever it is. Figuring out whether this new business is going to work has to be something you do nights, weekends, spare hours. So I would not let my existing customer base flail. However, there's a slightly different twist on it, which is if you have an existing business that you're already running and you already have lots of customers who are using that existing service, and all of a sudden you realized, oh my gosh, that service is going to not be what people want in about a year or two. I've got to develop a new one. And unfortunately, this new one is going to take all my time. Well, then the answer is different. Then you have to be willing to abandon your existing customers. And maybe you don't abandon them entirely, but you certainly deprioritize them because the failure to do that is what has sunk almost every single large successful company that eventually goes under. It's because they get so locked into their current and historical business model that they're not willing to take the steps they need to take to be successful with the new business model. And I can assure you, your customers do not care about your current business model. They do not care about your old business model. They don't care about your high-priced salespeople who are going to lose their job if you go to this new direction. They don't care about your quarterly revenues and how Wall Street will punish you. They just need what they need. And if that's changing, you have to meet it. So if that's the situation you're in, the answer is different, which is you've got to deprioritize the current customers and go all in on what the future customers are going to want.
Excellent, excellent. We've got a question in the chat from another Marc who wants to know, do you believe founders are too reliant on raising venture capital versus generating revenue through sales?
Yes, I'm 100% convinced people are too reliant on venture capital instead of generating revenue by sales. That's not to say there's not a very, very important role for venture. It is a way of accelerating your business. It's a way of taking something you have found will work and making the expensive steps of converting that into a repeatable, scalable model. But too many people think that venture is the money you take to figure it out. Too many people think that venture is the money that you take to let's get some velocity here and we'll make it up in volume. Or, wow, if we have lots of customers, eventually we can figure this out. Those are all terrible reasons. And if you say, I'm going to basically bootstrap this, I'm going to make this be dependent on the money that I can currently raise from my existing customers in what I charge them, and I'm doing so with a good margin and I'm cash flow positive, that's a tremendously powerful thing. Because then once you've realized I do have a model which works, which is cash flow positive, I don't need the money to survive. I need the money to scale, or I need the money to accelerate. That's the perfect time to then go and raise venture, because you know it'll work, or you're pretty sure it'll work, and you're just using that money to accelerate your business, to add customers more quickly, because you've learned that every customer I can add profitably. And that's a great use for it. So I would certainly start by saying, do I have a real model? And the best way to demonstrate that you have a real model is, can you perform that service for less than the amount that people are willing to pay you for? And if you can do that, you are in the driver's seat.
That's great. I love that. So we have two people. Carmen Young sent this in, and a person named PMG in the chat basically asked the same question. And it's all about finding the right people to align with to get your project off the ground. How do you find people to, whether they're your partner or maybe you're working together in some capacity, how do you find quality people that you can trust?
Yeah, listen, there's no easy answer. There's no magic interview question that all of a sudden reveals this. There's there's two versions of the same thing, which is that you unfortunately have to try a bunch of people. Really, really hard to get it right the first time. And usually, when you're hiring, your criteria is, I have to get this right, you're probably going to take too long. You're just going to have a very, very hard time doing it. And so there's two pieces to it. One is you have to be willing to accept that you've made a mistake. You have to hire people. You have to see how they do, how they're aligned with your values, whether you can trust them, whether they're high performing, whether they're any of the things you're expecting of them. And if they're not, through not necessarily any fault of theirs, because you are an equal partner in making the decision to have them come on. If anything, you're a bigger partner in that. You have to take responsibility for it and say, this is not going to work, and then do so in a fair, compassionate way. And that's not easy. One of the hardest things I've ever had to do is let people go. But unfortunately, if you do want to eventually have a group of people working with you who are above average, that doesn't come from hiring well. That comes from being willing to cut smartly. The other thing that you do is you collect people. And when I started Netflix, I was 38 years old, and it was my fifth or sixth, depending on how you count it, startup. And from each of those previous companies, I had identified these people who worked for me, who I said, wow, this person's a keeper. This is someone who I completely trust, who I know will hustle, who has the ethos of working at a startup. They're willing to work the hours. They're willing to come into work one day and find out we're doing something totally different today than we were doing yesterday. And all that work you did is useless now. We're doing something new, who love those things. And then when you start your next startup, it's sort of like, maybe I'm dating myself, but like the Blues Brothers movie, where almost the entire plot is, hey, we're getting the band back together again. And you're going to all these people you've worked with. And if you look back at, at Netflix, again, for example, two of the key people who were the very, very first people that I called when we knew we were going to do this were both people who I'd worked with at previous startups. So that's the quick one. And the last one I'll say, and hopefully this is self-evident, is sincerity. Is that obviously getting someone to join the company does require a bit of a sales job. But like any great sales job, it has to have a foundation in truth, which is you have to say, here's what it's going to be like. Here's what I expect of you. But then again, here's what we can give to you. Here's what you'll get out of this. And then you have to deliver on those things. And if you're honest and if you're sincere and someone is joining the company for the right reasons, you'll generally find that they're going to deliver in the way that you expected them to. It's when those things are misaligned, when someone gets in and realizes this is much worse than they expected, much harder, much different, that you're into problems. And I'll end this little diatribe with one last piece of advice, which is, and I posted about this recently on social, which is that, fundamentally a CEO has three important roles. And one is set the direction of the company. Number two, make sure you don't run out of money. But number three is make sure you have the right people around the table. And it is something you cannot delegate. It is something you have to focus on. So getting it right is one of your most important responsibilities.
Awesome. Awesome. That's great and terrifying all at once. Um, so speaking of trust, question just came in from Sommelier. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, but how does one build trust between your company and your customers?
How do you build trust between your company and your customers? Um, that's kind of a great question. Identically to the trust that you build between yourself and your employees is you follow through on what you say you're going to do. And so many companies say, we trust you, and then do all kinds of weird stuff to demonstrate they don't really trust you. You have to sign all kinds of crazy things. You've got to validate all sorts of things. And I'll give you a great, great story about this. Many, many years ago, um, I worked at a big software company called Borland International, and they were big. At the time, they were actually a rival to Microsoft. And you can guess how that went. But at the time, we were kind of on a roll. And we used to have these upgrade programs where if you were using our product and then a new one came out, well, you could buy the upgrade at a greatly discounted price. And of course, because this company was a normal business, it would make you prove that you were a existing owner prior to getting the upgrade. And it was ridiculous. They'd make you send in your old discs, or because this is back in the day when software came on discs, or they'd make you send in a page from the manual. This is the time when what the hell? That's my daughter. Not now. Sorry about that, guys. Um, this is back in manual when the documentation came on paper. And when I joined the company, I went, this is ridiculous. You don't trust your customers? Let's change this around. Let's say if you want to upgrade, just tell us that you really are entitled to it and we'll give it to you. Now, do you get taken advantage of? Of course. But you also made it way, way easier for the customers who were trustworthy to do business with you. And so, of course, we sold about 10 times as many upgrades as when we didn't trust people. We probably got taken advantage of a lot more because before it was zero, but on the whole, it netted out. And I've carried that through my entire career. I've always said, make it easier for people who are going to take advantage of you to do so. Because what you're really do is making it easier for the people who you can trust to do business with you. And making it easier for customers to do business, to trust them, will pay off in ways you never, ever expected. So like at Netflix, when someone reported, hey, my disc never arrived, we didn't make them submit a police report or a postal complaint. We said, okay, and shipped them another one. It's never been something that I've believed in doing. Make it easy to do business, trust your customers, and hopefully they'll recognize and return that trust in you.
That's great. Hope everything's okay over there, Marc.
Oh, no, no. I thought I shut. Listen, technology. I thought I'd shut everything down. My cell phone is off. It's on airplane mode, whatever. And now that someone sneaked in on audio.
No problem. All right, good. So we've gotten a number of questions that really all come down to this, which you've talked about before, which is people who really want to get something going and they just kind of don't know what. They don't really have an idea yet. Some people say follow your passion. Mark Cuban recently said that following your passion is bad advice because you're following your hobby instead of something that can make money. So I don't know if you can distill all that down into one perfect Mark Randolph soundbite, but let's see if you can do it.
Yeah, follow your curiosity. Uh, I
That's
don't agree with Mark Cuban at all, but he laid it out. It really comes back down to what's the point? Why do you? What was the question, Dan? That I want to start something? Is that what it
Yeah,
was?
yeah. So basically, people saying I'm graduating, I have this fire in my belly to get something going, but I don't know what that thing is.
Great. So I'd back up and go, all right, you want to get something going. That's code for I want to be rich. I want to be famous. I want to build a unicorn startup. Yeah, you got to follow Mark Cuban's advice, which is you've got to try, as an inexperienced, newly minted college graduate, come up with some idea that hasn't been done to death by the people in Silicon Valley who do this for a living day in and day out, and then you're going to navigate it all by yourself. Ridiculous. Um, don't try to do that.
Hmm.
Go the other way. Say, if the fire in your belly to start something is because, gosh, it'd be so cool to have a project that was mine, that I got to work on every evening and on the weekends, that I was passionate about, that I can't wait to see what happens tomorrow. My God, if that's what you want, follow something you're curious about, follow a passion, make your hobby into a business. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, there's two huge things that are positive about that. One is you never know. Trying to predict in advance what business that I can think of is going to make me a lot of money, really, really hard. A much more likely path is you start doing something you're passionate about and you stumble onto something which, whoa, I have developed something here that people are willing to pay me for. They are willing to pay more than it costs to produce it. In fact, there's a lot of people like this. It's not going to happen right away. You won't discover that by thinking it. You'll discover it by starting and by customers' behavior. By people's behavior, use your product or your service. You begin to learn these things that will inform the ones that actually work. And the other thing you're going to get out of this is experience. You are going to, I hate to break it to you, you're going to mess up terribly. You're going to make all kinds of mistakes. You're going to hire the wrong people. You're going to spend money on the wrong things. And that's fine. But for God's sake, do that at a small scale and start now. If my idea to get this done, I need 40 people and I need a couple computer science majors, and I'm going to need 3 or 4 million. You're going to be thinking about it and telling everyone, oh, I'm doing a startup. Will you listen to my pitch? For years. Do something you can start tomorrow and start learning how hard it is to convince someone to help you, especially when you're not going to pay them at all. Try learning how hard it is to convince a customer to actually use this thing. And you begin learning these skills that I swear they'll never abandon you. I mean, listen, what they say that, the best time, this is a stupid expression, the best time to plant a tree is now. The second best, or 20 years ago, second best time is now. Startups are no different. It would have been great if you had begun doing this when you were 7 or 11. If you had had a lemonade stand, if you had had a sold Girl Scout cookies, if you had done something which began to teach you all these skills about how to sell and how to convince people to help you and how to market in a low consequences environment. But you're just doing that now. And you'll see all those same skills. And I know it sounds trite, but they are the exact same skills. You'll make these mistakes at a small scale and then at a medium scale and then eventually a big scale. The stuff that I do now, yes, I've done it for 40 years. I've got a lot of experience at that. I don't make many mistakes anymore. And so I can take big swings and I can do so with lots of people and lots of money. But I didn't start that way. I started off very small, doing things that were apparently non-consequential, where I was doing the exact same skills that I'm using today. So follow your passion, follow your curiosity, but just do something. Don't dream. That will get you nowhere.
That's great. And I got to say, I started a candy stand and but me and my friends ate everything before we could sell it. So
And you learned an important lesson there, Dan, didn't you?
I did, I did.
It's true. There's there's a certain thing that I've heard about young people for so long that I've now convinced it is a genetic marker for entrepreneurship. And it's people who do candy arbitrage, who are 6 years old and realize they can buy the candy bar for 10 cents at the grocery and resell it the next day for $1.
Yeah.
And you would not believe how many big successful entrepreneurs I've bumped into who, when I tell them that story, they'll go, yeah, I did that too. It's seeing a problem and
Yeah,
going, there's got to be a solution to this. And I'm going to be the one who does it.
but you just can't eat your profits, literally. Um, so you've been talking a lot about selling your product or services, and we got a question in from Urson Kokol, who wants to know, how do you decide a price change for subscriptions, and how do you manage the churn that might lead to?
Oh, that's a great question. It's test, test, test. But your question is in two pieces. One is, how do I figure out what the right price point is? And then the question is, what do I do about it when it's going to make people mad? The testing one is the critical one. Subscription businesses are wonderful in that everything is testable. You should be testing every possible dynamic, everything about how you attract customers, how you lower the bounce rate when they arrive at the website. Every single step of your funnel has to be tested all kinds of different ways. What order do you put things in? What do you ask for? What are the requirements? What's the language you use? And then once they actually do the subscription, what are you going to do to try and make sure that they convert and renew and keep on going? It's infinite, which quite frankly is one of the reasons I love it. It is so analytical. But what you're talking about is that sometimes people are scared to do price testing because they're scared that people are going to see those other prices and go, why am I not getting the lower price? I have a friend here. And the answer is, you have no choice. You have to absorb that risk. But I can tell you it's pretty minor. And the better way to absorb it is to go, you have to do it, because the alternative is unlocked. I've got to stay at this price. I'm not even allowed to figure out if my price should be any different. And the way I've always thought about it is that you're going to potentially upset a very small percent of your audience. But the gain from upsetting a very small percent of your audience is you bring in many, many, many more new people. And that is a gamble that I will take every single time. The case where you don't do that is if you have an extremely small audience. So, for example, if you're a Boeing or you're someone who only has 150 possible customers in the world, well, you can't risk making any of them mad at you. But for most subscription services, that isn't the case. There is always more, and you have to constantly be experimenting. In a weird analogy, and God, I don't know how my mind comes up with this shit. There's big debates about teaching hospitals, which is, shouldn't every piece of surgery be done by a very, very experienced surgeon? But if that was the way you did it, you would never have very experienced surgeons, because they would never be given a chance to do surgery for the first time. And subscriptions are like that. You have to be willing to risk upsetting some people by having price leaks so you can optimize and figuring out what the very, very right price point is. And to your second part, it's very, very similar to what we were speaking about earlier, which is that you cannot be afraid to change to what the right price is because you're afraid of upsetting people. Listen, fine, grandfather people in. So if the new price point is $20 a month and you have everyone else on 17, leave them all at 17. But if they're all at 17 and the new best price point is 14, well, you might want to think pretty seriously about giving everybody the break, because otherwise, as they find out that it's available to new subscribers for less than they're paying, you're going to have a riot on your hands. But there's way, way, way more to learn about subscription stuff, and I hope you're well into it. It's fascinating. For obvious reasons, I'm a big fan of subscription businesses.
Really, you would know something about that? Something in your past? Something interesting.
But it's funny, Daniel. People go, where did the idea for Netflix come from, and what's your biggest regret? And quite frankly, seriously, one of my biggest regrets is that it took us 18 months to try subscription. And the reason it's a big regret is because my prior career, I was a magazine circulation director. I started two magazines. I knew subscriptions, and it
Yeah.
never occurred to me that you could video rental subscription. What?
Well, I was one of your early users, and I remember thinking, like, these people are idiots. No one's going to give these movies back. But turns out you weren't, Marc.
Yeah.
You were not.
Sometimes things break your way, Dan.
That's great. So we've talked a lot about sort of nitty gritty things, and we got one question in from your site that I thought was pretty interesting. It sort of literally takes us outside of all this a bit. What has nature taught you about business?
Oh, that's it is a great one. So I mean, for those of you who don't know, I'm really, that's my life passion is not nature, but my life's passion is the outdoors. For some reason, that's where I feel alive, especially when you pair it with the type of stuff that I do, which is all these action sports outdoors, backcountry skiing and mountain biking and climbing and kayaking. So it's important to me. So the main reason I do those things is because they make me feel alive. Almost all of them on this common denominator of there's not a lot of worrying about the past and thinking about the future. It's very much in the moment. And there's something extremely zen about doing these disciplines where you have to spend many, many hours in the moment. No social media, no worrying about what someone said or what might happen. You're in. And there's something very special about that for me. But as a byproduct, and I didn't do this because I didn't get into nature because I wanted to have it be good for business. But by spending all this time outdoors, it taught me a lot, because being outdoors, things are unpredictable. Stuff happens, and you have to be prepared. You have to have a raincoat. And you learn that the hard way when you're out on a beautiful, bluebird day thinking what can possibly happen. And you're hours away from camp and it starts to hail. And so from then on, my family still gives me grief about this. Even on the shortest little day hikes in beautiful weather, I've got a raincoat in my pack. And business is the same way. You are always thinking about what could happen and making sure you have the figurative raincoat tucked away, so that lo and behold, when bad stuff happens in the business and all of a sudden you pull something out of your pack and everyone goes, God, how did you know that was going to happen? And you go, I didn't. There was 10 things that could have happened, and I'm ready for all of them, even though most of them is wasted. So other thing is that navigation is uncertain. Sometimes, yes, you're hiking on as we call them, wilderness freeways, well-trod trails, but a lot of time you're going off trail, or you're going without a map. And you're reacting to what you see, and startups are very much like that too. But perhaps the biggest thing is that it taught me so much about leadership, because when you are leading people in the backcountry, you have to do all these things, like being able to evaluate the strength of your group. You have to communicate with confidence and clarity exactly where we're going, even if you may not be that confident or clear about where we're going yourself. You've got to begin to learn who you can count on. You've got to be able to say, okay, we're going to meet here. You go this way, and count on the fact they're going to actually show up on time with the things they need done. Over and over, you learn situational leadership. You learn that Sometimes it's fine to be talking about when to stop for lunch, to go, what do you think? What do you think? Hey, how do you? And do it very collaboratively. It's a different style of leadership when someone breaks their leg and all of a sudden it's going, here's what we're going to do. Here's what you're going to do. And you're going to do it now. And to realize that leadership can all exist within the same person is a very, very powerful lesson too. So much so, I've spent most of my life working with an organization called NOLS, which used to stand for the National Outdoor Leadership School, which is an organization which uses the wilderness as a classroom to teach leadership. So anyway, you asked a simple question, but as you can probably tell, extremely passionate about it. Big part of my life, big belief in the power of wilderness to make better business leaders.
That's great, and I think that's a great way to wrap up this session. Let's all get outside and hopefully not break our legs or get into a storm. But you never know what'll happen out there. But Marc, everyone's going nuts in the chat. Really, really appreciate your time once again. All these great answers, and thanks everyone for the great questions. You lit Marc up. We love to see him like that. And if you want to hear more, the That Will Never Work podcast, you should absolutely be listening to that. Also his book. Marc, any other places they should be looking for you?
Well, ground zero for all things Marc Randolph, as always, is the Marc Randolph website, marcrandolph.com. And there you'll find links to all the social stuff. If you don't have the attention span for anything long, I'll carve it up into little tweet-sized nuggets for you, or LinkedIn, YouTube, and now, of course, TikTok. But you'll also find links to the podcast, to the book, to my blog, et cetera, et cetera. And place to, if you have questions for future editions of Ask Marc, is a place to even leave them there.
So that's great. Marc, one last question though, just because it's so in the news. You just said TikTok. You cool with TikTok? What do you think? Is everyone freaking out for no reason? What do you think?
As always, there's always a little thin veneer of validity in these things. But I think the concern about TikTok should be the concern about all social media.
Right.
I mean, absolutely. It's one of the things we trade off in exchange for using these things for free is our privacy. So yes, we should be concerned about that. But there's a little bit of scapegoating going on, and there's always some. You have to be careful. But I happen to really like TikTok, both as a user and as a content creator. And so I hope that we're able to resolve this in a way that allows all of us to keep using it.
Yeah, because we wouldn't want to stop seeing you do those TikTok dances. I mean, hypnotic. But thanks again, Marc. Thanks for everyone for your questions. And for those of you who we didn't get to your questions, be on the lookout for the call out. We'll definitely try to get to them next time. So thanks again, and we'll see you again soon.
Well, thanks, Dan. Thanks, everybody. See you all soon.